Hi everyone, it's Brennan Banahan here for We Make Fly Fishing Simple once again. Um, I am really fortunate today to have a great guest. This is Jim Schottenham. Jim is probably one of the nation's leading experts on antique fly reels and now the curator of the Museum of Fly Fishing here in Manchester, Vermont. I think the best thing to do is to have Jim tell us a little bit about himself, and then he's brought us some amazing things to look at today.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Of course, again, my name is Jim Schottenham. So I became interested in old tackle from a young age. I've been fishing since I was perhaps 5 years old. Fish for anything that swims. And up into my 20s, I discovered my grandfather's tackle box in the basement of my grandmother's home. And inside were some antique lures, some glass-eyed plugs, a couple of old reels. I got very interested in what those were all about, started doing a little research, and discovered that the reels, in particular fly reels, have a very strong history in upstate New York, where I'm from. In fact, most of the very earliest fly reels in the United States came from that Mohawk Valley region. In particular, there was a gunsmith by the name of William Billinghurst who obtained a patent in August of 1859 for what is accepted as the very first fly reel patent in the United States. The William Billinghurst birdcage reel is a side-mounted reel. You'll notice that it's a horizontal. And there's a number of innovations that Billinghurst incorporated into this patent that were really groundbreaking for the time. The spool design in particular was intended to allow the fishing lines used in the 1850s to dry while they remained on the spool. And why is that important? The reels used a horsehair or cotton, linen, silk lines that if they remained on the spool after a day's fishing, that moisture would rot or mold and mildew, rendering your line useless. So it was necessary for anglers of that time to take the lines off of their reels at the end of the day's fishing. Now it's time consuming. You had to have a line dryer, had to strip your line off the reel, allow it to dry, and then wind it back on your reel. Billinghurst decided to do away with the need for that by having this open spool design. This would allow the fly lines of the day, or fishing lines, to dry while remaining on the spool. A number of other innovations. Billinghurst has this little folding handle, which allows a reel like this to be compact enough to just kind of fit in an angler's pocket. So by utilizing this large hub, it had the same retrieve ratio as a geared reel. So people that collect Kentucky reels know what I'm talking about. Multiplying reels would rapidly bring your line in. This reel without gears and that large hub would provide the same functionality. And then I lost my train of thought there. We can edit this out. Yeah, the folding handle. Yeah, folding handle foot. So this is considered by many to be the grandfather of fly reels in the United States. And the side-mounted reel was in favor until about 1900, but that did not stop a drugstore operator by the name of Elmer J. Sellers. He ran a drugstore in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, and in 1934, he received the U.S. patent for his fly reel. This was called the Sellers basket reel. It certainly looks an awful lot like the original Billinghurst, with the exception of instead of having to make numerous soldered connections with this spool, Sellers' design utilized two molded halves. That would allow him to manufacture these for a greater cost reduction. It would be more effective for him to put these together. Also has the little folding handle like the Billinghurst reel did. And it was suspected for a number of years that the store was where Elmer Sellers would manufacture these and put them together himself. We now know that he did have someone manufacturing the parts for him. Sellers paid him a tooling fee, and then they were able to make they would have been able to make these by the thousands. But this is 1934. These side-mounted reels had fallen out of favor, so not entirely certain what Sellers was thinking when he patented this reel design, but it is the last of its kind patented in the United States. And then you'll notice too, the line guide on here has a little agate insert, and that of course would help with the stripping of that line. The only drawback, of course, is if that agate received a chip or a hairline crack, that could potentially put a nick or damage your line. That could spell disaster if you had a big fish on a line. The other things that are somewhat notable and recognizable today, modern fly anglers that are familiar with Galvin reels, in particular the Galvin Torque, the Galvin reel owes much to the original design from Albert Pettengill. This Pettengill reel was manufactured in 1887. It's an upright reel. Pettengill's idea was rather interesting. There are two types of Pettengill reels. There's this upright version, and he also has a horizontal. In his patent, Pettengill describes the ability to move the foot of the reel from the rim or to the backside. So you could have a reel that would mount on the side or a vertical reel. But that spool design, for those of you that are familiar with the Galvin reels, that's pretty much that same design. For people that are familiar, and I dare say that fly fishermen are very familiar with the name Stan Bogdan. Stan, of course, was a very famous reel maker from Nashua, New Hampshire. But it's interesting to me, at least, that in 1850, a reel that was manufactured by a gunsmith named Morgan James from Utica, New York, another side-mounted reel. This is brass. It's rather heavy, but it's incredibly well made. The simple click and pawl drag system, if you're familiar with Stan Bogdan's early reels, this click and pawl drag system is very similar to that used on his very early steelhead fly reels. And that design, again, it was effective in 1850, and it was certainly effective again 100 years later in Stan's reels.
You know, I was looking at that other big automatic. Yeah, I'm fascinated by it because if you're a lazy Zion, you find automatics kind of appealing. What can you tell us about that?
Well, what's interesting about this is there's a design feature to this Van Horn automatic reel. Again, perhaps 100 years later, the reel manufacturing company STH advertised a reel that utilized cassettes as opposed to spare spools, and claiming that it was an innovative idea. Van Horn's automatic reel, just after 1900, also utilized the same type of system. It allowed the angler to disassemble the reel so that they could access the spool from inside, essentially a little cassette. You could put different line weights on your different spools, and they would be interchangeable with the reel. You pop that spool on, pop this cap back on. What's interesting to note too, you'll see the intricate gearing. Again, keep in mind, this is circa 1900, 1910. And this is the business end. I'm not sure how well this is going to translate. There you go. You can see that spring. Anyone that's ever tried to work on an automatic reel, I can promise you that they'll remember if the spring happens to break. These are pretty strong, and you can do some serious damage to your fingers. So you want to be cautious with that. So anyway, the cassette idea has been around for a long time.
You know, what's kind of interesting now, as we've seen some of these, is the fact that it's not so much that modern reels are copying the technology of years ago in some cases, but it has to do with the fact that these compact reels share a certain amount of engineering design that is updated over time. The functionality is improved a little bit, but the fundamentals remain the same.
Yeah, there are certainly some rods that have similar features to rods that were manufactured more than 100 years later. This rod, I think, is rather interesting. This is an 1887 patented rod from the Horton Manufacturing Company in Bristol, Connecticut. This is interesting to me for a number of reasons. Back in the 1880s, fishing on Sundays was really frowned upon. Horton decided that by making a steel rod that was telescopic, he could hide this rod and sneak away on Sundays undetected and be able to fish. And if you can see on the screen, you'll notice there are no guides on this rod. It's not that they're missing. It was purposely built this way. This is a steel rod that telescopes. The rod, in order to do this guideless system, utilized the fly line through this little mounting hole through the rod. In order to get your line attached, of course, line being very limp and limber, you wouldn't be able to insert that here and just push it through. So Bristol decided to provide a wire with these rods that you would insert into the end of the rod, snake it down through, attach it to your fly line, and subsequently pull your fly line through the guideless rod. So that was an idea that Daiwa tried to reintroduce in 1980, introducing their interline rods, but I'm afraid they were about 100 years too late with that original design.
You know, any of us that have missed a guide along the way, you know, we think it's an inconvenience. Imagine setting this rod up on a day when you got to restring this rod every few minutes, God forbid. But, you know, the innovation here, though, if you think about it, I mean, outside of like not be caught fishing on Sunday, which is a whole nother topic. But the fact is that the innovation here comes from people who love to fish. That's what it's all about. You know, whether you're a rod designer or a reel designer, it's all about designing the piece that's going to make you better at it, make you able to enjoy the sport more, and bring you glory. Because some of these guys were probably considered to be, you know, how do I say this the right way? So the celebrities of fly fishing in their day. But Jim's brought us a couple of other things too. But before that, I want to talk about something we have coming up here in our part of the world. At the end of April and the first 2 days in May, we're going to have the first Bat and Kill Fly Fishing Festival in Arlington, Vermont, which is the next town over from Manchester. Manchester is the home of the American Museum of Fly Fishing. And what I wanted to point out is that not only is there a film festival and there's lots of great things to see here, including the museum, but Jim has brought us something that is going to be fundamental to some of the things that you'll see at the show if you have a chance to join us. You can find information about this on the web. It's going to be the first annual Bat and Kill Fly Fishing Festival. Jim, show us what you brought.
So, of course, everyone that's familiar with fishing, and many of those that aren't familiar with fishing, certainly know the name Orvis. Charles Orvis was a tireless promoter, started his business in 1856 in his brother's hotel at the Equinox in Manchester. Charles Orvis is perhaps the best known of all the fly fishing makers in America. And he produced in 1874 and patented a reel that is considered to be the father of the modern fly reel. So this is a reel that was intended to be mounted upright. Much like the earlier Billinghurst design, there are a number of perforations on this reel. Again, that was to assist in drying the line while it was still on the reel. The Orvis reel, as you'll notice, is a very narrow spool. That was, again, purposeful. The intention there was to be able to bring a lot of line in without the need for a lot of gearing, but that very narrow spool allowed for rapid pickup of the line. These reels have a click that's behind this little cap on the back that's marked CF Orvis, patent 1874. The original reels that Orvis produced did not have a click. When he introduced them, he kind of caved to some of the outdoor writers at the time that thought it would be better served if he had a click, so he added one. This is a very successful reel, was produced for perhaps 40 years or so. And again, you'll notice that the design of this is very much like modern reels. So the other thing that's kind of interesting is the reels back then were mounted and housed in this hinged walnut case. And that's the way they came from the factory.
Pretty well thought out. You know, this has been really interesting. You know, these are things that sort of real product. I mentioned a lot that I think is still brilliant. You know, we were kidding the other day that real records so well built that themselves out of business. Still rods don't break. Many of us that have you know, broken up graphite rod here and there know just how much fun that is. So the idea of a steel rod is still kind of compelling, but I'm not sure I'm ready to go back to the 1880s again. But hey, this was great, and I'm hoping that all of you reel designers and rod designers out there are going to get busy. And if you do come to Arlington this spring, I'm not trying to make work for you, Jim, but if you have interesting fly tackle and you'd like to have a look at it or have Jim take a look at it, you're welcome to come by. Jim and I will both be at the show during the course of it. It'll be the first time you'll see a fly fishing film festival. Now, some people probably can't tear themselves away from that, but we all know what a movie did for our sport a few years ago. Jim and I were both asked to be in that movie. You know, we were kind of competing for the Brad Pitt role, but under the circumstances, we just backed off. We figured it better let a real actor do it. You know, we were trying to contain ourselves. So here you go.
I have a face for radio, so
Thanks very much, Jim. This was great, and we're going to have you back again because there's several other things that we probably need to talk about. But thanks again. It was great to see you today. Thanks. Bye bye.